Hello, my name is Steve Langford, and I want to tell you about my book, Discovering Your True Self, a Guide for the Journey. In the book, I describe your true self as the person that God created you to be, the person God intended you to be. Unfortunately, the true self for all of us is displaced by what is sometimes called a false self or a pseudo-self. In the book, I talk about the false self as a constructed self. The constructed self is who the world said we needed to be if we wanted to be accepted, if we wanted to be included, if we wanted to belong, if we wanted to be successful. The constructed self is the persona that we created to present to the world in order to belong. The expectations of the culture in which we grew up, the expectations of family, of school, of church, were the construction material we used in order to construct this self as we conform to those expectations. So the culture in which we grew up was the architect of this constructed self. Their expectations were the building materials we used, but we were the project managers. We were the ones doing the work to construct this self that we can present to the world in order to be accepted. The constructed self is who the world said we needed to be. And part one of this book talks about how that constructed self was put into place. It talks about the power of anxiety to drive the constructed self. It talks about how we conform to expectations, and in doing so, created a false self, a self we constructed, and we hid other parts of ourselves. The second part of the book talks about the spiritual journey that is involved to move us beyond the constructed self into the true self. As we take this spiritual journey, as we grow in Christ, the true self is set free. The Apostle Paul said it this way in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Stop letting the world squeeze you into its mold, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. In that simple statement, the Apostle Paul talks about what we move from, the constructed self, the self the world said we need to be, into the true self, the transformation, and the means by which that takes place through the renewing of the mind. The second part of this book, and the heart of this book, talks about that spiritual journey, learning to change the way we think under the guidance and the instruction of the Spirit of God. It talks about this spiritual formation, this spiritual journey that leads us to live differently, to live out of grace, to live out of who God says we are, to live out of healthy boundaries, so that the core of the book not only talks about truths to shape the true self, but it gives us tools and resources that we can put into practice in our own lives to become healthier emotionally and relationally and spiritually. So that the third part of the book then describes what it's like to live out of the true self. Each of the chapters in this book has questions at the end that will guide you as you reflect on what you've read, or that you can use in a small group as you study the book. Because one of the things we say in the book is that you don't take this journey alone. I hope you'll explore the book. I hope you'll read it. I hope you'll use it. You can find it on Amazon.com, or you can go to my website, PastorSteveLangford.com. There you'll find the book, and you'll find an excerpt from it, in addition to finding information about the other books that I have published. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to enter a conversation with you about the book and its concepts. I'd love to answer your questions. I trust it will be a resource for you on your journey into discovering your true self.